They fired me for efficiency. I wish I could say it was a misunderstanding or a fluke, but no, it was calculated. They looked me in the eye, smiled like it was a routine HR procedure, and handed me a pink slip while calling me overqualified and too independent. I had spent 3 years at Whitmore Solutions climbing, learning, and proving myself, and yet, in 30 seconds, they stripped away every ounce of control I thought I had. The CEO didn't even bother to meet me personally. That, I realized later, was their first mistake. My name is Elena Carter, and I am not someone who gets pushed around. Born and raised in Chicago, I learned early that nothing worth having comes without strategy. My mother taught me chess before I could ride a bike, and my father ran a small consulting firm that survived decades because he always thought 3 moves ahead. So when Whitmore Solutions tried to tell me I was redundant, something in me clicked. Not anger, not despair, but a cold, precise calculation. If they wanted a war, I'd give them a battle they'd never see coming. Let me take you back to how it all started. Whitmore Solutions was the kind of company that looked shiny on the outside. Modern office, glass walls, trendy coffee machines, but underneath, it was a jungle ruled by politics, ego, and thinly veiled threats. I joined as a junior analyst, bright-eyed and idealistic, hoping to make a difference in the corporate world. I worked hard, learned fast, and made my mark by streamlining a client reporting system that cut project turnaround by 40%. I thought I was helping the company. They thought I was making them too efficient. The first warning sign came subtly. My manager, Lauren, a woman with perfect posture and a smile that never reached her eyes, started scheduling last-minute strategy reviews. Every meeting became a test. Every project I led suddenly scrutinized under a microscope. Emails I sent that once earned praise were now nitpicked for tone and grammar. I brushed it off as normal corporate bureaucracy. I was young, ambitious, and perhaps a little naive. Then came the day that changed everything. The company announced a restructuring initiative, and whispers filled the office like wildfire. I overheard snippets. Elena's too sharp. She doesn't play politics. Maybe it's time. My stomach sank, but I kept my composure. I had a plan, even if I didn't know it fully yet. The HR meeting was brief and sterile. They called me into a small, cold room with one-way glass. The HR director smiled sympathetically, like I was some fragile object. Elena, your efficiency, it's been impressive. But we've decided to let you go. We need someone who aligns more with the team culture. Culture. That word hit me differently. It wasn't about performance. It was about power. About obedience. About control. Walking out, box in hand, I felt something strange. Not rage, not tears, but clarity. They underestimated me. They assumed I'd sulk, cry, maybe leave quietly. I didn't. I knew the real power wasn't in the title or the office. It was in knowledge, in timing, in leverage. And I had both. Over the next few days, while they probably expected me to stew in defeat, I observed. I documented. Every email, every procedural loophole, every internal communication became a piece of a puzzle. I knew Whitmore Solutions thrived on hierarchy and ego, and that's exactly what I planned to exploit. I started small. I reconnected with former colleagues I trusted, subtly gathering intel. Some were bitter, some wary, but all had pieces of information I needed. Insider details about financial discrepancies, email threads that revealed strategic blind spots, and, most importantly, vulnerabilities in the leadership team. Everyone has one, even a CEO. Then came the breakthrough. While reviewing a public financial disclosure, I noticed an anomaly, an overlooked clause that allowed significant leverage over executive decisions. Most employees would see it and shrug. I saw opportunity. I spent nights cross-referencing internal documents, analyzing patterns, and connecting dots that no one else bothered to notice. By the end of the first week post-firing, I had a roadmap. A way not just to get revenge, but to reclaim control and make them realize the mistake they made. But I couldn't rush it. Whitmore Solutions thrived on predictability, and predictability is a weapon if you know how to use it. I played my part perfectly. Elena Carter, the dismissed overachiever, harmless, bitter, invisible. Every casual interaction in the office now was like slipping past a guard. Smiles, nods, small talk. No one suspected I had already set the gears in motion. And then, the first domino fell. A minor leak I orchestrated revealed a tiny but embarrassing oversight in the operations report. The CFO called an emergency meeting, scrambling to fix it before it became a scandal. I watched from the outside, silently enjoying the chaos, knowing full well that this was only the beginning. My plan was never about petty retaliation. It was about exposing incompetence, making the leadership confront their own arrogance, and most importantly, teaching them that underestimating someone like me was dangerous. People always think revenge is loud, dramatic, visible. They imagine confrontations, screaming matches, or viral moments. But real power, the kind that leaves scars in boardrooms and not on Instagram, is quiet, calculated, strategic. That's the kind of revenge I was crafting. I was rewriting the rules while everyone else followed the script they thought they controlled. By the second week, I had my allies, former team members who had been overlooked, underestimated, or bullied. I shared just enough information to motivate them, to guide them, without exposing my hand. We were a network operating under the radar, each move precise, each reaction predictable. And they had no idea. I still remember walking past the glass-walled CEO office that Thursday morning. He glanced up, saw me, and nodded politely. I smiled back, my box now empty, my mind full. They thought they'd won, that the chapter was closed. Little did they know, the real story, the story they'd never anticipate, was just beginning. And that's how it started. Me, Elena Carter, fired for efficiency, turning every weakness they believed I had into a weapon, every oversight into leverage. I didn't just plan to make them pay. I planned to rewrite the entire game, quietly, strategically, and irreversibly. The morning after the operations leak erupted inside Whitmore Solutions, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced since my first day at the company. Not the calm of someone giving up, but the calm of someone who has stopped pretending. For the first time since they fired me, I felt like I was steering my own story again. And I wasn't slowing down. I spent the next few days tightening every thread I'd pulled loose. I had already triggered doubt inside the leadership team, but doubt alone wasn't enough. People forget doubt. They bury it under new meetings, new tasks, new coffee orders. I needed something that wouldn't fade with the next news cycle. Something that would make the CEO himself search for answers he didn't know he needed. That opportunity appeared in the form of a quarterly performance audit, which, ironically, I had helped design before being efficiently removed. Buried inside the protocol was a clause requiring a cross-verification of project allocations by department leads. A harmless line to most, a loaded gun to me. All I needed was the right pressure point to pull the trigger. While the company still saw me as an ex-employee packing interviews and disappointment, I had been quietly rebuilding my network. People talk when they're stressed, and the people still at Whitmore were stressed enough to spill more than they realized. A former coworker named Jasmine told me during a casual coffee meetup that the CEO had recently pushed a few expensive initiatives through without proper documentation. That alone wasn't enough to bring anything down, but paired with the audit protocols I knew by heart, it was a doorway. The next step was simple. I submitted an anonymous inquiry to the auditing firm the company hired, framed as a concerned employee who noticed discrepancies between departmental expense logs. Nothing dramatic, just enough to trigger a mandatory preliminary review. And because the firm was external, Whitmore Solutions couldn't sweep it under those expensive rugs they were so proud of. While the audit gears began turning, I focused on something more subtle, destabilizing the false sense of unity among the leadership team. Corporate leaders love to pretend they're aligned. In truth, they're like chess pieces, each one convinced they're the queen. All I had to do was introduce a little friction. I started with the CFO, Malcolm, a man who prided himself on being the quiet genius of the company. He had always hated the CEO's impulsive decisions but lacked the backbone to challenge him. All he needed was a spark. So I gave him one, an anonymous message containing a snippet of an email chain that suggested the CEO planned to shift blame for upcoming losses onto the finance department. The snippet was real, pulled from a thread I had archived months earlier, but I carefully removed context. Malcolm didn't need the whole story. He only needed enough to light his anxiety. Within 24 hours, he scheduled a private meeting with the CEO. I didn't know what was said in that room, but I knew the look of a shaken executive when I later saw him rushing through the lobby, muttering to his assistant while clutching a folder so tightly his knuckles whitened. That was my second domino. The third came from an angle no one expected: the company's prized AI-driven analytics dashboard. I had helped build its earliest version, which meant I knew its vulnerabilities. It wasn't hacking. I hadn't touched a forbidden line of code, but I understood how data patterns shifted when reports were submitted incorrectly. So I tipped off a mid-level manager I trusted, telling him to double-check the incoming metrics. His findings didn't match the CEO's rosy projections. When he asked around, he discovered several teams had been quietly told to round up numbers before submission. And just like that, internal whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into concerns. Concerns turned into documented inconsistencies. No fire spreads faster than the fire people light themselves. I stayed quiet through all of it. My moves weren't loud. They were intentional, each one pushing the leadership team closer to the edge, without them realizing someone was behind it. They were too busy pointing fingers at each other, too convinced the internal politics they mastered were the only battlefield that mattered. But the real strike came when the auditing firm escalated the preliminary review into a full investigation. A simple discrepancy had metastasized into a discovery. The CEO had been reallocating funds between departments to inflate his quarterly performance metrics. It wasn't illegal on its own, but paired with the lack of documentation and the internal exaggeration of projected revenue, it painted a very suspicious picture. Suspicious enough to warrant board attention. And attention from the board was the one thing the CEO feared more than anything. News of the full audit spread faster than wildfire. Employees whispered in hallways, Slack channels buzzed with locked threads and muted messages, and executives began holding closed-door meetings so often that the office resembled a maze of desperate faces and frantic pacing. You would think watching them crumble would make me feel satisfied. But satisfaction wasn't the right word. It felt more like inevitability, like watching a tower you always knew was unstable finally tip into the wind. The real challenge, though, wasn't orchestrating their downfall. It was staying invisible. Revenge isn't revenge if you get caught. And I knew the CEO well enough to understand that he wouldn't hesitate to blame an ex-employee if he found the slightest thread connecting anything to me. So I erased every trace of involvement. Deleted my notes, scrubbed email metadata, cleared device logs, switched communication apps, and cut off contact with anyone who might accidentally connect us. I didn't come this far to get sloppy, but the moment that sealed everything wasn't anything dramatic. No explosion, no confrontation, no cinematic speech. It was a simple phone call. A board member named Christine Montgomery reached out to me through a professional networking site, asking to discuss my experience at Whitmore Solutions. She didn't say why, but her timing told me everything. Someone inside the boardroom had realized the audit's inconsistencies traced back to systemic leadership failures I had spent years watching up close. Failures I could describe with alarming detail. I agreed to meet her in a downtown cafe. She arrived with a leather notebook, a quiet confidence, and the kind of expression people wear when they already know the truth, but want to hear it spoken aloud. "Elena," she said, "I've heard you were one of the company's strongest analysts." I smiled politely, until they decided I was too efficient. She nodded slowly, studying me like she was piecing together a puzzle. "I'd like to understand what really happened inside Whitmore." It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. The kind that only appears when the ground beneath someone powerful has started to crack. I took a breath, steady and deliberate, realizing that everything I'd set in motion had led to this exact moment. And then I began to talk. I told Christine everything. Not in a flashy, dramatic way, but calmly, methodically, like a boardroom presentation where every fact, every timeline, every email chain fit perfectly into the narrative. I didn't embellish. I didn't overplay my hand. I just laid out the truth. The CEO's manipulations, the CFO's blind spots, the department head's unwillingness to question authority, and the very loopholes I had noticed months before I was fired. She listened quietly, occasionally jotting notes in that leather notebook, her expression unreadable. I could tell she wasn't just listening. She was connecting dots, imagining the consequences, picturing the dominoes falling exactly as I had orchestrated them. And when I finished, she leaned back, clasped her hands together, and said something that made me realize just how far my little plan had reached. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice steady but carrying weight, "what you've uncovered, it's bigger than a performance audit. This is systemic. If the board sees this, it could mean major leadership changes." I let that sink in. Major leadership changes. A phrase that, just a week ago, would have seemed like wishful thinking. Now it was inevitable. Over the next several days, the board quietly convened. The CEO called emergency meetings, demanded explanations, tried to spin the story, but each attempt only made the evidence more obvious. Internal emails, department memos, discrepancies in financial reports, each one a knife pointing back to the very mistakes he thought he had buried. It was almost poetic. I didn't need to make a single phone call or send an email. My work had done the talking. My absence had done the talking. And now, sitting on the sidelines, I watched as the empire they thought untouchable began to unravel. The first public change was small but symbolic. The CEO's personal assistant sent an office-wide email announcing that the board had requested an external review of leadership practices. The tone was neutral, professional, but underneath, every employee understood what it meant. The whispers that had been floating through the office halls grew louder, more deliberate. People were finally questioning decisions they had once blindly followed. Then came the resignations. Quiet at first, a department head here, a senior analyst there, but the momentum built. Leadership meetings became tense, accusations flew, and morale plummeted. For once, the perfectly aligned executive team was no longer perfect. They were exposed, fragile, human. I could have stopped there. I could have walked away and let the consequences unfold without me. But that wasn't enough. I wanted them to understand exactly how close they had come to underestimating me. So I allowed one carefully chosen ally to leak just enough information for the board to realize that their overachiever had orchestrated the unraveling without a single overt move inside the office. It wasn't revenge in the usual sense. There were no confrontations, no shouting matches in glass-walled boardrooms, no viral social media posts. It was silent, elegant, and devastating. I had used what I knew, who I knew, and the mistakes they had made to their own advantage. And in the end, it left a mark deeper than any humiliation could. The final step came when the CEO was asked to step down temporarily while the board conducted a full investigation. His resignation wasn't forced in public. It was quiet, professional, as if he had always planned it that way. But I knew the truth. His empire, which had seemed unshakable, was now subject to scrutiny because he underestimated one woman. I returned to my own life, quietly, professionally, and without fanfare. Whitmore Solutions eventually stabilized under new leadership, but the scars remained. Executives now double-checked everything, departments communicated more openly, and the board had finally realized that efficiency and integrity were not threats to be eliminated, but assets to be nurtured. And me? I kept moving forward. I had learned that power didn't reside in a title or office space. Power resided in knowledge, in foresight, and in the courage to act when others assumed they were untouchable. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. I needed accountability, and that's exactly what I delivered. Sometimes I think about the CEO, how he must feel, knowing that the very system he manipulated became the instrument of his own scrutiny. I imagine him walking through those glass-walled corridors, remembering the woman they fired for being too efficient. I imagine the quiet dread of knowing they underestimated someone who wasn't just smart, but patient, methodical, and, above all, prepared. I don't regret a single move. Every calculated step, every observation, every late-night analysis was worth it. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I refused to let arrogance dictate my career, my worth, or my future. Whitmore Solutions became the perfect example of why efficiency, intelligence, and foresight are not weaknesses. They are weapons. As for me, I continued to build my career, but on my terms. Consulting, advising, teaching, roles where my skills were recognized, valued, and most importantly, respected. I learned that the real triumph isn't just in proving you're right. The real triumph is in changing the game entirely, quietly, and leaving no doubt that underestimating you was the biggest mistake anyone could make. And sometimes, when I pass by those corporate towers, I smile. Not because I won, not because I exacted revenge, but because I know what people fail to realize. The strongest power is the power you never show until it's too late. The same power that made me unstoppable. The same power that made them learn a lesson they'd never forget. They fired me for efficiency. And in the end, that efficiency rewrote the rules of the game. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. And stay tuned for more thrilling revenge stories.